Welcome to the podcast Life After Addiction and Indictment. I'm your host, Steve Cloward, and I spent most of the last decade and well over $100,000 on coaches, consultants, masterminds, and events trying to figure out how to reclaim my life again. On this podcast, I'm going to share the tools, the tips, the tricks, and the hacks that allowed me to forgive myself so that I could reclaim my life again. I'll be interviewing experts in mindset, leadership, entrepreneurship, sales, marketing, branding, and so much more. I'm glad you're here. Sit back and relax and enjoy the show.
Let's go! This is Life After Addiction and Indictment.
Welcome back to the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time out. And if you find value in the things that are discussed here today on the podcast or any other of the episodes that you've listened to, if you would please jump over and do a 5-star written review on Apple, I'd appreciate it. Today, I've got a guest. I'm really excited to hear her story and learn more about her. And, if there's anyone who's been through difficult times and has, survived and triumphed, today's guest is the epitome of that. So today, I'd like to welcome Amanda Blackwood to the show. How you doing, Amanda?
Fantastic. How are you doing, Steve? It's so good to be here today.
Oh, thanks. I'm doing well. Appreciate it. So we talked a little bit before. You're out in Colorado. And where did you grow up?
Absolutely everywhere. So I have moved 43 times in my life.
Oh, my
father
goodness.
was military.
Okay.
I was born in Germany and I've lived all over the place.
Wow. That had to be tough in itself as a young kid dealing with schools and then moving and no friends. And that was tough in itself, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. By the age of 11, I had perfected the art of making friends without having emotional attachments. And you can already guess how dangerous that was for somebody.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. But I can understand why you probably did that. Now, I'm going to assume, which is not very wise, that was maybe was that a conscious choice, or do you think that just subconsciously took place?
I think at that point it had become a conscious choice. I think before that it had been subconscious, but by the age of 11, I had seen so many friends that I had made over the years just vanish into nothing without ever having any way to reach out to them or contact them afterward. It's a little different today for kids in the military with the invention of social media. We've got Facebook and Instagram and all these ways that kids can keep in touch with Snapchat. We didn't have that when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s growing up.
Wow. That had to be really tough, man. So that does make a lot of sense though, because that'd be hard on both sides, I imagine, but obviously hardest on you. So, wow. So 11, and then you mentioned that you were in Ogden at age 12 for a short time. How long were you in Utah? Was that because of the military as well, because of the Air Force Base here?
Yeah, my father was stationed at Hill Air Force Base. We moved there right about the time I turned 12. And we lived there. My parents, last I heard, still lived there. We'll get into that later.
Okay. Throwing us a curveball right now.
I ran away several times. I left the state with other runaways when I was 17. And 2 days after I turned 18, I flew out of Utah because I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
Yeah, I can understand for various reasons, actually. Wow. So when you left with other runaways and stuff, like how would you meet other people? Just out and about on the streets, or how did that come about?
Mostly through school.
Okay.
It was kind of an interesting way to build these relationships with people because, again, I had this ability within me to form these relationships, these very one-sided friendships, to where they would think that I was absolutely their friend, but yet I still had this wall built up where I wasn't allowing myself to be vulnerable to other people. They were allowed to be vulnerable with me, but I was not able to show that weakness. I'd already had so much abuse at that point in my life. I just saw no point in it.
Wow.
When I was, 16, my mother found out that I was having behavioral issues in school. I had skipped a couple of classes here and there because that's what the troubled kids did. I was taken out of my school and put in an alternative school for troubled teens, which were mostly drug pushers and gang members and those kinds of kids. And I was still a relatively innocent, nice kid. I was still a pretty good kid at the time. But this is where things kind of really started taking a downhill slant for me. Before that, when I was running away, I started running away at 15. I was still going to school and attending all of my classes. But when they put me in this alternative school, I got to hang out with the really bad kids. And that was when I started skipping the state with other people. And there was one day that my high school boyfriend at that time, there were several, and two other people, we all piled up in his 2-seater Honda CRX and drove from Ogden down to Phoenix, Arizona. It took us 4 days to get there. That car was so loaded down.
Oh my heavens. Yeah, that's a teeny car. For those that don't remember the CRX, 2-seater, little tiny hatchback. Wow.
Yeah, the two girls we had to lay down in the hatchback.
Yeah. You're probably all curled up just to fit back there. Wow. Yeah. Okay, well, so, we're going to talk about some things today that it's going to be a little tough maybe for some audience members. I don't know. But, you were involved in being trafficked, correct?
Right.
So tell us, talk to us about how that came about. Did things, just tell us, I guess, your story, because I've been involved in listening to others that have had the same experience on different levels, maybe the same level. I don't know, but there's a lot that can go into it, whether family's involved, knows it or not, all sorts of different things, whether there's mind control, you name it. What age did this start and how did this come about?
That's funny. That's always the first question I'm asked is, how old were you?
Really?
And that's because we have such a perception of human trafficking here in the US that we instantly think of young children, right?
Kids, yeah.
Right.
Right.
So if we back this all the way up to when I was a young child, I was molested at 4 years old. Wow. I wasn't molested again for a very long time, but then the very next event was when I was 12, again at 13, again at 15, again at 16. You can see where I started trying to run away during all of that.
Yeah, based on what you said, the school situations, you can see it.
Then I was raped at 17. That was when I left the state. So you can see there's a pattern here. It all kind of lines up. But my inability to have solid functioning relationships with people is definitely tied to these experiences of abuse. People that are trafficked, for the most part, have experienced severe abuse in their own childhood growing up, and they do have that detachment from humanity. The first time I was trafficked, I was actually 18 years old. It was a man who was more than twice my age. I was in Phoenix, Arizona, so I did go back to Arizona. When I was there, I had been dating him for a little while. I was living with him. I had nowhere else to go. I had been homeless for a bit. Anything to get away from home, right?
Yeah.
And he took me in, and I was his girlfriend, even though he was.
Isn't that a kind of a tactic they use? They prey on weakness or people that are in those type of situations. And
right.
Okay.
Right. The most people that are trafficked, they're usually trafficked by people they know and trust and love, and people who have a sense of authority over their lives. So when you are talking about child trafficking, most kids are trafficked by parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, sometimes boyfriends and girlfriends. But when you start getting into the older age groups, 16, 17, 18, and up, then you start looking at really domestic violence situations. And a lot of people, including myself at the time, believe that what they're going through is considered domestic violence and not trafficking because it's not clearly defined for them. They don't look at this and say, well, this is human trafficking, because what the media portrays is that this only happens to little kids and they're snatched off the streets by total strangers, right? When it's somebody that you know and somebody that you have grown to have this sense of trust with, how do you define that as human trafficking? Because that doesn't look like what that looks like.
Right.
But the Department of Homeland Security defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So there's no mention of money. There's no mention of transporting a person from one place to another. Yeah, it's not at all what we have been designed and made to believe that it is. Movies like Taken with Liam Neeson, people love that movie. It's doing more damage than good. And independent authors who want to write stories about prostitutes and think that this means human trafficking, again, they're doing more damage than good. While a lot of prostitutes are victims of human trafficking does not equal prostitution, and prostitution does not equal human trafficking. There's an overlap there. It's the same with human smuggling across our borders. It's two separate issues that both need to be addressed. They're not the same thing.
Boy, I'll say it needs to be addressed. And wow. So he's twice your age. You're obviously feeling, I assume you've got some place that you're feeling some security. And then how does it get evolved to the next steps?
I was made to be complicit. I was told your job is to make sure that I'm comfortable and that I'm happy here. And if I feel like you're not doing the things that I'm asking you to do, then I can ask you to leave. And for the most part, I was all right with that because it didn't cross lines. But there was an event where he finally crossed the line. And he told me that his buddy was having a birthday blowout weekend in Las Vegas, but he couldn't go. So he was going to have me go with his buddy as kind of a fun little treat. The way it was framed to me was that I would get an all expenses paid trip to Las Vegas. And I was looking forward to that because even though I couldn't gamble at 18, I knew that New York had that really cool roller coaster that went around the outside of the building and went upside down. I went on that roller coaster when I ran away at 17. We stopped in Vegas on the way down. I loved it. I couldn't wait to get back on that roller coaster, right?
Wow.
So we get to Vegas and we go straight to the hotel where I'm rushed up to the room and I'm told I can order room service once a day. And when the hotel staff bring the room service up, they're to knock on the door and leave. So they won't ask questions. They were in on it. And I only had the one guy that came up to the room. It was my boyfriend's buddy. It really was his birthday weekend. And I was the gift.
Wow.
I was the gift.
And so you're stuck in the room the whole time then too?
Right. And I could have, hotel rooms don't lock from the outside. I could have left at any time. But if I left, he had my ID for the flights. He had all of my identification. I had no money. I had one change of clothes. Everything that I had was back in Arizona still.
Wow.
I knew that if I left, I was going to be homeless in Vegas where I knew nobody. And I was going to be far worse off than if I just put up with what I was going through and go back to Arizona and go be homeless there where I at least had a part-time job and a few people that I knew. So I had to put up with it. For 52 hours, I put up with repeated assaults. He'd go down and gamble. I would eat a single meal and I would go through repeated assaults. And it was this cycle for 2.5 days.
Goodness. Wow. That had to be just horrific.
Yeah. So of course, when we got back to Arizona, I split, right? I'm not going to be sticking around waiting for this to happen again. This is nuts.
Yeah.
I've already been through a lot. This was too much.
No kidding.
And I floated around for a while. I ended up falling out of a hayloft and hurting myself when I was 19, working on a horse farm. I was done with people. I would much rather be around animals than people for the rest of my life. And I got this job and I loved this job, but I injured myself pretty bad. And I was married to, at that point, another man, a completely different man who was more than twice my age. And he turned out to be abusive, but he didn't traffic me. So by comparison, I thought he was great. So I married him.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
And when I injured myself, I needed to go have surgery on my knee. So I left. This was in Arkansas. So I really did float around for a while and moved multiple times again. I left Arkansas and flew down to Florida. My plan was that I was going to stay with my dad's mother so that I could get my knee surgery from some of the most renowned knee surgeons and cartilage surgeons in the country. We're right there in Florida. Except I got down there and I was abandoned.
Really?
My family told my grandmother, I'm assuming it was probably my mother, but it was my parents. They told my grandmother that if she took me in, they would never speak to her again. So here it was, 10:30 at night. I am abandoned on the streets. I've got nowhere to go. I know nobody. I have my one connection only had my grandmother's phone number because this was 1999 and I didn't have a cell phone. A lot of people didn't back then.
Right. Yeah, not back then.
Right. So what was I going to do? I was homeless all over again. And a young couple came and found me while I was sitting on a curb crying and asked me what was wrong. It was probably about 11 at night at that point.
Jeez.
And they told me it was a couple. So it was a young man, a young lady. We have a place and we will give you your own room to stay in if you come back with us so that you can get on your feet. And what they really meant was they'll give me a place to stay until they could find the highest bidder.
Oh my goodness.
Course creators, say goodbye to intimidating software and eliminate multiple subscriptions and say hello to Backbone. Backbone helps course creators thrive with their all-in-one, easy-to-use sales and marketing platform. Backbone gives you all your automation in one place to capture, nurture, and turn more leads into customers. With Backbone, you get unlimited courses, membership sites, funnels, landing pages, surveys, and forms with our easy-to-use drag-and-drop features. That's not all. Backbone provides a full CRM and pipeline management, two-way SMS, workflow automations, call tracking, full analytics, built-in AI, 24/7 support, and so much more. Stop paying for multiple tools and put more money in your pocket with Backbone. Just go to backbonelms.io now to get your free 14-day trial. Backbone supports letthemlive.org to help defend the defenseless by donating 5% of each subscription every month. Jump over to backbonelms.io now to start your free trial today.
This is something that people listening, got to understand that maybe you haven't heard this stuff before, but this happens way, way, way more than you can even imagine.
Right.
Which is just unbelievable, but it's time that everybody starts to understand, realize that this is real. And we've got to start doing something to start, changing things, because this is just, I can't imagine having to go through that kind of stuff.
Well, and the average number of times that a person is trafficked is actually 7 times. I was trafficked 3 different times in my life, but the average is 7. Can you imagine ending up in this brutal cycle over and over and over again?
My gosh.
And the average lifespan of somebody in trafficking is about 6 to 7 years. At the end of that, they die of a drug overdose, they're beaten to death, they commit suicide, any number of things trying to get out of this.
Wow. Man.
It's a mess.
Yeah, that's just incredible. So this couple's working together just as a way to, is this just a way to make money, I'm assuming?
Right. They were broke. She was 15, which I didn't know at the time. He was in his 20s.
So was she under his control then too? Is that?
I believe she was under his control. I don't believe he was trafficking her.
Okay. Jeez.
Yeah. So, and I tell people all the time that what helped me to survive was I grew up, born in 79. I grew up in the 80s, and my favorite TV show for many years was MacGyver with Richard Dean Anderson.
Yeah.
Loved that show. I could not get enough of it. But he was brilliant, and it made me start trying to think of creative and interesting ways to make things work. I found different things throughout my entire childhood on how to make a light switch turn off when my parents turned my doorknob so that they wouldn't see that I was still awake reading a book. And I did it with thumbtacks and a piece of string. I was a very creative kid because of MacGyver. But that was also the reason that I was able to escape. So I wrote about that in one of my books called Detailed Pieces of a Shattered Dream. And one of my websites, I have a couple, one of my websites is called Detailed Pieces, and it's based on that book. It was the first book that I had ever published under my name. I was super proud of that.
No kidding.
And I've got 13 now as of tomorrow.
13 books?
Yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Jeez, that's way cool.
But when I got out of that situation, I floated around again, homeless, looking for people's couches to crash on, and it just kind of trying to make it.
Yeah.
I worked multiple jobs. I was constantly bouncing from one place to another. Eventually, I ended up going back to Arkansas and then off to California. I knew that California was the land of opportunity, not to be famous. That wasn't my plan.
Okay.
I went to California because I wanted to be a secretary to somebody important.
Wow.
I ended up modeling for Harley Davidson. I was on Alias and Will and Grace, and I fell into all of this stuff completely by mistake.
Oh my gosh. That's incredible. So how did that happen? I mean, just like meeting certain people and
Not even, well, kind of being in the right place at the right time, I suppose.
yeah.
I signed up to be an extra, and I was invited to have a reoccurring role on the final season of Will and Grace. They called me, hey, we need you for this scene. We need you for this. And I didn't have any experience with this, but apparently I was a bit of a natural. So they kept on calling me back, and it was great. But at the time I was married to somebody else. He was a stunt man in the movies. He was quite a good stunt man, but he had been injured on the filming of one episode of Maniac McGee back in the day. Because of that, he had to leave the industry. And when I kept on getting the callbacks, he got really jealous to the point of violence and got really upset and accused me of improper activities with everybody under the sun, because there's no way they would have wanted me otherwise. And I walked away from what could have become a career.
Wow.
And I did it trying to save that marriage.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, yeah, the power.
Should have kept the career. I had it longer than I had him anyway.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, well, so you've gone through those horrible experiences. I mean, there's got to be obviously lots of trauma, lots of issues going on. I mean, did you ever turn to drugs or alcohol, anything of that? Or how did you cope with it?
Most of it was by trying to research psychology, strangely enough. So I started quite young, trying to figure out, why do people work this way? Why do people think like this? Why are these things continuing to happen? And I started trying to break it down, especially after that last marriage failed. I was thinking, I've got to break this cycle. I keep ending up with these people who are insanely jealous and abusive, and I got to change this. So in the middle of all of this, I became friends with a police officer who lived in Scotland. He was in another country. And he was really helpful to me in my research, because he was telling me about his own personal experiences with arresting people, especially the repeat offenders, what their offenses were, what he suspected that they were guilty of outside of that. You know, we just had this
behavior.
Right. And we got along really well. I mean, he lived all the way over in Scotland. So what are the odds that, we're ever going to actually meet in person? It didn't matter. But after 7 years of us knowing each other, he came to visit me, and I went to go and visit him, and we decided that we were in love.
Okay.
I was so excited to have a relationship with somebody that I figured, this is a safe person. He's a police officer. I've known him for 7 years. And 7 seems to be this constant theme that pops up in my life, because he asked me to get a fiance visa, and I moved over there to be with him. I gave up my career, my car, my apartment, all overnight, got my visa, and I left for Scotland. And we knew each other for 7 years before I got there, and it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Oh my hell. Wow.
I was 31 years old.
Oh my gosh. And that's now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not typical at that age, is it? I mean, I know adults, but seems like from what I've read or heard others talk about, that's getting to the age that they're typically off in them, or whatever happens, depending on how deep it then they're involved and who they're involved with, I guess. But
It
31.
definitely happens. The youngest person in the state of Colorado in recent years to be rescued from trafficking was only a 3-month-old baby. The oldest was in her 70s.
Wow.
So it definitely happens where you can have these older people that are still involved in trafficking. But in my particular case, I was seen as an exotic commodity. If you think about it,
Wow.
I had been on TV. I was on Will and Grace. I was on Alias. I modeled for Harley Davidson. I had this portfolio, and I had the typical California accent, which is basically to us not an accent at all, right? We don't hear an accent. Well, in Scotland, I had a television accent.
Wow. So you are exotic. You are a prized possession.
Right. And he could charge more for exactly those reasons.
Man, how long did that take place?
He trafficked me through different dating websites like Plenty of Fish for a total of 152 days before I was finally able to con my way out of there. And I'm incredibly proud of that. But during that time, I tried to escape once, spent every penny that I had remaining on an emergency flight home. And because of the abuse, I ended up with a kidney infection so severe, I missed the flight, and it was a non-refundable ticket.
Man.
I tried to take another emergency way out, but that was suicide by train. And hey, you got to fail at something once in a while, right? I'm glad that's what it was.
Jeez. Wow. That's crazy. So, wow. So you finally get out of there.
Yeah.
And then what happens in your life?
So I got out of Scotland by the skin of my teeth, got back to California, and found out that he was hunting me down. And the way I found out was I heard a bunch of commotion outside of my apartment one day, and I looked through the peephole to figure out what was going on at the neighbor's house. And it was him banging on their door because he had my address off by one number.
Oh my gosh.
It scared me. So I moved again and again and again and again. And I lived in this constant state of hypervigilant fear. He was going to come for me. And when he found me, he was going to murder me. I had it all in my head. This is exactly what's going to happen. I started taking self-defense classes. I was taking Taekwondo, Jiu-Jitsu, and Wing Chun every week, all three. I wanted to learn anything and everything I could to try and defend myself. He was a very tall man. He was 6'1", 6'2", something like that. A police officer with physical combat training.
Yep.
I was a 5'6", somewhat defenseless female.
Yeah.
I needed to learn how to defend myself. But through the arts of martial arts, I started learning that strength came from more than just your muscles. Strength came from your heart and from your mind. And I started realizing that if he's going to keep attacking me, I have to learn how to fight back, even if it's not physical.
Yeah.
So he sent an email to somebody that I had just gotten a job working for, somebody I'd known for 14 years.
Jeez.
And he sent an email to them with a bunch of photos and videos attached of me being raped during my trafficking in Scotland. And I call it rape, even though I didn't have the opportunity to say no, because that opportunity was taken away from me.
Right.
That makes it rape.
Yeah. You're definitely not giving consent. That's for sure.
Right. Exactly. I didn't want these things to happen.
Right.
But the photos that he sent made this 14-year friend of mine question who I really was and ask me, well, I mean, if this is the stuff you're into, then, I can accommodate. It ended this friendship. After 14 years, I'll never speak to this person again. Other people started to find out what had happened to me because, again, he was finding out who they were and getting their email addresses and contacting them with this information and lies.
Yeah.
My best friend at the time started telling people that I had been a high-priced call girl because she didn't understand how this kind of stuff could be non-consensual. It hurt. It hurt
That's
bad.
That's gotta hurt. And just, I bet you just want to, lose it. I mean, and then imagine, when it's going on, even if you're wanting to get help, you don't know who you can even trust. I mean, which for those that might find this very hard to believe, who aren't, researched on these kind of topics, there's not very many law enforcement that you can even trust,
Right.
you know?
Well, and I've known a lot of good cops too.
Oh yeah,
And
and I'm not certainly, there's no
right.
doubt
And that's
about it.
part of the reason that I thought that I would be safe when I went over with him, is because I knew so many good police officers in LA that
Right.
I trusted those people. Surely I could trust this guy, especially after knowing him for 7 years.
Yeah, no
That
kidding.
just,
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, someone that invests that kind of time and you're interacting, to me, I just probably like you, I'd assume that person does care, you really have built a real relationship,
right.
but
I watched his daughter grow up in videos and photos, and she was 12 when I got to Scotland. I'd watched her grow up for 7 years at that point, from when she was just a little bitty thing.
wow.
It was heartbreaking when I left there, not because I was leaving him, but because I was leaving her.
Yeah.
I loved
Wow.
that child so much. I loved his nieces and his nephew. His sister was great. His mom and dad lived right down the street, and they were wonderful people, and none of them knew what was happening behind closed doors.
Yeah. Wow.
So finally, when I was still in California, I had lived in California on and off for 14 years at that point.
Okay.
I couldn't take it anymore. I was done with California. I had no friends left. I had nobody that I could talk to anymore. And in 2016, I packed up a car and loaded up a huge crate with my cats. And I drove overnight, leaving at 9 o'clock at night, arriving at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to here in Denver, Colorado, to start over.
No kidding.
I was done with all of that mess, but that doesn't mean that it stopped.
Yeah. Okay.
She put those same photos and videos on a pornography website and made me famous. And in 2019, I was recognized in a grocery store. Not for being on Alias or Will and Grace, not for being on Harley Davidson magazine. I was recognized for being in a porno.
Wow, that's crazy.
It destroyed me, but it broke me in such a way that something inside my brain snapped, and I remembered that self-defense training that I had been going through and about mental strength. And I remembered everything that I knew about all the psychology that I had studied over the years. I decided I was going to fight back. If people were going to keep finding me because he was including my social media information, they were going to find out why they were finding me. That's when I started to speak up. Now, I speak I speak at international summits. I do speaking tours. I've got my 13th book coming up just tomorrow. I'm very active in fighting and speaking about this. And I hope that monster knows that he's the one who created this monster.
This monster. Yeah, I love it. Did you find once you flip that switch, because that is so powerful, did you find that allowed you to take your power back?
In a huge way.
Yeah.
And by taking
really
my power,
free you,
right.
Yeah.
And by taking my power back, it's such an interesting concept because my power was taken away when I was 4.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had power until he created the monster inside.
Yeah.
And I can't give him credit for making me strong. I was always strong.
Yeah.
I just had to find that strength within me and dig it up the hard way to bring it out.
Well, that's the truth with every single one of us. We all have it within. It's just, you have to find it, because whether it's going through what you've been through or so many other difficulties or trials, or frankly, just getting stuck in the trap of the rat race and following blindly what you're told and what's normal. And, you're giving it away, your power away there, because you're not being you. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not doing anything to, look inside to build you. And that's where it all comes from,
Right. And if you don't know who you are, how do you expect other people to know who you are?
Yep. Yep.
People can't love you until you figure out what it is that you need from them. My autobiography was published on my 10-year anniversary of freedom from trafficking. That came out June 19th of 2011. Wow. June 19th was 2011 is when I left. It came out June 19th, 2021.
Oh, wow. Okay.
July is when I met the man that's now my husband.
No kidding. Just a
Doing
couple
all of
years.
that work.
Wow.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to have any kind of a relationship with this man if I hadn't done all of this hard work on myself first, and to figure out what my healthy boundaries are, what my needs and what my wants are, and writing about it, whether that book was ever going to be seen by anybody else that ever lived ever again or not.
Yeah.
Writing about it was my way of healing.
Wow. That's beautiful. So through that experience, was that where you found the, not only to heal yourself, but, to get to where you're at, you also have to forgive.
Yes.
How did that, that'd be, that's a tough thing for most people. Especially going through what people put you through. So, how did you deal with that?
Well, we have to understand first what forgiveness truly means. We've been made to think and conditioned to think that if somebody says, I'm sorry, our immediate response is, it's okay. But what if it's not okay?
Yeah.
And what if you never get that apology? Jeez. Forgiveness is not about getting that apology from somebody with them admitting that they've done you wrong, because there's plenty of abusers out there in the world who will never do that.
Right.
One of the hardest moments you will ever have in life is accepting apology you will never receive.
Yeah.
And I had to recognize that forgiveness isn't about apologies and telling somebody it's okay and moving on and rekindling your friendship or your relationship. Forgiveness is nothing more than letting go of the hatred and the anger inside.
Yeah, without that, you're enslaving yourself. You're,
right.
You're hurting you,
Right. You're allowing them
still
to control you and control your mood and your emotions and your healing and your progress in life. If you can find a way to let go of that anger and that hatred, you can find new ways of healing and moving forward and thriving. If I hadn't let go of that anger, I would still be one of the most angry people on the planet. I wouldn't be able to tell these jokes and smile and talk on podcasts like yours. I wouldn't have human interaction with people. I wouldn't be able to look into your eyes right this second and just feel that you are a decent, trustworthy human being who's been through your own crap and you've come out the other side. We have a human connection. We're hardwired to need these human connections. And it's so important that we embrace that.
Amen. That is so true. Yep. Wow. Man, so 13th book comes out tomorrow. That's so cool.
That one is actually my cookbook. It's called Surviving in the Kitchen, Recipes for Life, Love, and a Full Stomach. I'm so excited about it. I've been wanting to write a cookbook for years.
That makes sense now as I looked at your different images. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to use that image because I love that image of you. What is it? You've got the pink wall behind you, that image.
Yeah, the little chef hat.
Yeah, that is so cool. Wow. So how long has it been since the officer from Scotland was looking for you? How long ago was it when he was actually pounding on the door and you had to basically move again?
That was still in 2011. I don't know how many times he's come over here looking for me since then. I do believe he has stopped looking for me at this point because it would be almost impossible for him to find me. This is not a challenge for people to try, by the way. I go by the name of Amanda Blackwood in everything and on everything, but that doesn't mean that's what my legal name is.
Right. It gets to the point you don't have a choice, I'm sure. You just got to do what you got to do to be able to live a quote normal life to some degree.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's very odd, but I do actually have what would be considered a normal life. I have a wonderful relationship with a fantastic husband. He was a Navy man for 11 years. So he's got some disciplines under his belt. He has a divorce under his belt, so he's done a lot of hard work through counseling and therapy himself to be able to heal from that. Because of these things, because we've done this inner work on ourselves, we now have this open communication, and we do have that bond that at 11 years old, I didn't think would ever exist in my life again.
Wow. What a gift that is.
Yeah. And I do have one best friend now. And I thought that the last best friend that I had was, truly a best friend. She was the one that told people that I was the high-priced call girl.
Yeah.
But the best friend that I have now is somebody who is supportive and generous and thoughtful and just so amazing. She's a photographer. So when I have all of these photos that are available, so often she's the one that's taken them. She's taken most of my author photos on most of the backs of my books. She's taken some cover photos for me. She's incredible.
That's cool.
Her name is Colette, and I absolutely adore her. So just a little shout out.
Big shout out to Colette. Yeah. Cause I mean, if you got one friend like that in your life, you're doing all right, because it's an interesting dynamic. I've had some pretty good friends. I've won a certain couple I call best friends. One unfortunately passed away, but yeah, those friends that love you, care for you, will be there for you regardless, no judgment ever, no anything, just a true friend. And that's hard to come by,
Somebody that you can talk to and be real with.
Exactly. You can just be who you are, period. Yeah. That's cool. Well, Colette, you got a great friend in Amanda. I know that too. I can tell that for sure. So that's very cool. So you got your books. What other things you're doing? Obviously you're, speaking, you're doing other things. Obviously you're passionate about sharing your experiences because, I assume that's because, that does help so many people, it's like I feel like people, especially in today's world, really starve for authenticity because with social media and stuff, everything is so fake and everyone's just putting out the good stuff, and when I started when I got indicted and went through that stuff, for some reason, I can't even say it was a conscious decision, but I've pretty much always just been an open book, even though I have cared about what other people think. When it came to stuff I went through, I just was open about it. And that made it so much easier,
Right.
And I don't know exactly why, but, we're doing what you're doing. Obviously, I think, there's similarities. I think as humans, we not only starve for, being needed and wanted, but, I don't think there's very few humans, unless they're just downright evil demons or whatever you want to call them, that aren't fulfilled most by helping another human. That's, to me, that's more than any amount of money I've ever made or ever will make. It's just, that's what makes me feel good. And I think most people are like that. And by you sharing and, your experience, it doesn't matter if it's someone that's trafficked or not, anybody can relate. Cause I used to think when I was in prison, there's three things at night that I would think, focus on that I had that day to be grateful for, and then I would also often think, well, there's certainly a whole lot of people in this world that have it way worse than me. Even though I'm sitting here in prison and, yada, yada, but still there's a lot worse circumstances, and, people that listen to this podcast, a lot of them are going through trials, been through, maybe stuck and not sure how to move forward. And, with someone like you speaking up, I can't think of really a much more difficult challenge to face in your life because there's so many pieces that you would need to be overcame in order to move forward, not only internally, but there's just, the mental hurdles that, you've had to face. And I just feel like you went through what you did and you also had the things that you gravitated to, the psychology and the thing. There's so many things that you've said that line up to make me realize, wow, now she's in her calling right now. Does that make sense? Do you feel that way?
I do.
I was just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I do.
Just,
When you mention authenticity on social media, and it can be really, really difficult to find that. Everybody wants to show the highlights of their life. They don't show the bad days, right?
highlight reels, yep.
Yesterday, I put up a social media post showing my chronic hives as they have invaded my face. It was a no makeup picture, first of all,
Yep.
which is a struggle for most women anyway. But it showed all of the red splotchiness all over my face from massive amounts of hives eating at my body right now, from the bottoms of my feet to the top of my scalp.
Wow.
And then I put up the photo with it of me with all of my makeup on, my hair down. I said, hey, just because you're having a
That's
bad day
powerful.
doesn't mean you can't pick yourself up by your bootstraps and keep moving on. We
powerful.
all have bad days.
Amen. And it's okay to have a bad day,
Right. But when it comes to speaking, I learned through all of my research that less than 2% of all victims of human trafficking survive.
Gosh. Wow.
Most die. Most don't have
Crazy.
what I have. And of the few of us that survive, so few have the ability to heal, to have a normal life. So few have the ability to speak or to write about their experiences because they live in this constant state of hypervigilant fear.
Yeah.
I was there for a while, but I was given these abilities to be able to do these things. I'm going to use them because there's 98% of us don't live, and they deserve to have a voice too. And when it comes to trauma, it is neither a destination nor a competition. Trauma rewires our brains. It creates new neurosynapses in our brains to tell us when this happens, we need to do this. And in the moment of being in trauma, those things are very helpful. That neurosynapse needs to exist to be able to help you survive that moment. But it's after, when that trauma is no longer existing and that neurosynapse is still causing you to react a certain way to a certain situation, that's when it's no longer helpful. It's like holding a sharp piece of glass in your hand. You know, this used to be something. Maybe it was a favorite tea mug. Maybe it was your favorite window that you would look out of when you were a child. But now it's just a sharp piece of glass and it's cutting into your hand. If you drop it, you're letting go, but you're afraid to drop it because this was something important to you. Those neurosynapses need to be fought back against. They're called trauma reactions. That I have compiled a list of more than 60 different trauma reactions that we have in our brains. Things that we can go through, and so many of them are tied together in so many intricate ways. But I have a podcast called Growth from Darkness, where my co-host and I, we go through what each of the different trauma reactions are, what they are in general, what they mean, how they show up in our lives, as well as what the long-term consequences are of not dealing with them and how to fight back against them to have a better life. Each different episode is a different trauma reaction. I've got years worth of material at this point.
Wow. That's got to be a huge resource.
Right. It's so important to understand these things. I also have the Survivors podcast, where I talk to other survivors who've survived trauma and they've written their own books about their recoveries and their journeys, to be able to give other people hope to climb out of these dark places that they're in. Because like you said, not everybody's been through the same trauma, and no two traumas are ever the same. But if somebody's in a dark place and they're looking for hope, there's lots of it out there. But not knowing what your options are to go and find that hope is the same as not having those options.
Amen. Yep. Wow. That is so true. Wow. Well, Amanda, you are an incredible woman.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit more about your books. I mean, I know there's 13. I'm going to go look and I'm going to list them all in the show notes, but go over some of the different, focus that each one's about. I mean, you don't have to cover all of them, but if you can, great.
So my main book that is the top seller right now, it's in talks of being either a limited series or movie in the next few years. It's called Custom Justice, and I'm very hopeful for this one. But that's the book that was published in June of 2021 on my 10-year anniversary of freedom.
Oh,
It
wow.
chronicles everything starting with my early childhood memories of when I was 4 years old, and it does not go into explicit details, but the chapters are kept short for a very good reason. Is because people need to have time to walk away from it and to process what they're feeling and thinking, because it is going to be a little bit triggering for other people that have survived any kind of traumas.
Gotcha.
My number one seller right now is actually not autobiographical, though most of my books are. It's actually called The Road We Left Behind. I painted this book cover myself, by the way.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's
But
cool.
the original painting is hanging in a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago, Illinois. And if you see the
That's cool.
Chicago Tribune article back here,
Uh-huh.
I was interviewed by the Chicago Tribune when my art got to its destination, because they did an unveiling at this event for the human trafficking survivors. It's called Carry Your Own Baggage, because we have to carry our own baggage through life for so long before we find a safe place to set it down.
Wow.
But that's not at all what the book is about.
Okay.
The book is inspired by the true story of my grandmother's first love. His name was Arthur. And in the book, she is, she's a wing walker in the 1930s and 40s. And for the people who don't know what a wing walker is, there's a little airplane up here.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. I remember those wing walkers. That's crazy.
Yeah, they're daredevils. But my grandmother went through so much tribulation in her earlier days that she was an inspiration for me. I knew that if she could go through everything that she'd been through and still be this amazing, loving, wonderful, kind, gentle soul, then there was hope for me still too. I think she'd be proud of the person that I am now.
So I
She
think it
passed
worked.
away in 2009.
Oh, wow. Well, I think you've done a pretty good job of following her footsteps. I mean,
Thank you.
that's awesome.
She was pretty amazing. But even though I usually talk about all these dark subjects, I actually have a comedy.
Do you really? I can actually see that for some reason.
So 30 synchronized woodpeckers. So after everything that I'd been through, right?
Yeah.
I would have been perfectly happy being a hermit for the rest of my life, never seeing another human face, never talking to another person. So instead, I became a flight attendant.
Really?
And this book is all the funny stuff that happened on my first year on the job.
Oh, but that's hilarious.
It was pretty great. I loved doing it. I did it for 2 years, 3 months, 28 days. Not that I was counting. But it was a wild adventure every single day that I went. From near misses to almost falling into a pilot's lap to really awkward situations that you can't even imagine a flight attendant would ever get into. I found myself in those positions every time. And all the little cartoon drawings inside the book, I actually drew myself. And it was the first time I had ever drawn a cartoon.
No way.
There's one right there.
Oh my heck. That's pretty decent for not for drawing. Wow.
And before I had painted this book cover, that was the same year that I first started learning how to paint.
Jeez.
I had only been painting for 5 months at this point.
That's crazy. Wow. You're a woman of many talents.
I hope so.
That's
I
cool.
hope so. Because I'm still hoping to discover a few more.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. Well, is
I have
there
a sci-fi series? I've got all kinds of stuff.
I love that. That's just that's great. Do you have any specific or any words of advice or wisdom for the person out there that maybe feels alone, that's struggling and just really struggling to just believe in themselves or believe that life can get better?
If you're alone, reach out to me.
Bingo.
I'll talk to you. I'll help you find
awesome.
somebody. There are anti-trafficking and domestic violence shelters across the country. There's always 988. If you haven't heard of 988, check it out. This new campaign is where you can dial this number instead of 911. If you dial 911, the police and fire show up, right? If you dial 988, you're paired up with a therapist and a person with lived experience who can talk to you and to figure out where you are and find the resources that you need to be able to get you back on the right track. 988 is brand new. They're rolling it out all across the country, and it's amazing.
Awesome. I never even heard of that.
Yeah, this is something that we need to be more aware of as a society.
Amen.
I think it's been around for, at least the last year. And there are some cities that are still looking for a therapist to be able to pair with. So if you're a therapist and you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast and you're interested in helping out, reach out to them. Just Google the 988 and then look at their website and then reach out to them. Let them know that you have resources that you'd be willing to offer. People need this kind of stuff.
Big time. Wow. That's great. I'll continue to talk about it.
There's no shame in asking for help either. I know a lot of people feel like they're going to be judged for going through what it is that they're going through. Just know that if somebody has done something that caused you trauma, that is a reflection of them, not of you.
Yep.
You are separate from what happened to you. That does not define who you are. It does not change who you are in your very core being. Find somebody to talk to. And one last tip on therapists. I think I drove my first therapist to leave the industry. I traumatized her so bad. It is okay to get a second therapist or to keep shopping for a therapist until you find someone who can actually help you, who you get along with and you can trust. They're used to it and they're okay with it. And it's better than traumatizing them until they quit.
I agree. Yeah. If you can't be real and talk about what you need to get help, then next.
Yep, exactly. Most people admit to lying to their therapist too. You're lying to the one person that can help you if you tell them everything. And if you don't feel like you can tell them everything, you need to find somebody you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow, that's great. Well, I hadn't heard of that 988. That's awesome to hear that that's rolling out. So I will definitely put that in the show notes and continue to do that. So that's fantastic. All right, Amanda, final things. Where can people find you? I'll have, of course, your websites and social medias and things in the show notes, but where can people reach out and find you?
I have two different websites. One is detailedpieces.com. My primary website right now is growthfromdarkness.com. It lists episodes for both podcasts as well as my mentorship program, my speaking engagements, all of that stuff is listed. They can also find me on Facebook. So facebook.com/Amanda Blackwood Survivor. I'm very active on Facebook, probably a little bit too much instead of writing the next book.
You're doing all right if you've written 13.
All since 2018 too. So I'm averaging 2 books a year right now.
Wow. That's fantastic. Jeez. Man, that's awesome. Okay. Well, I'll have all that in the show notes, and, I sure appreciate your time, folks. If you found value in this, please, I'll list your podcast as well in the show notes. And if you'd jump over, folks, and leave a 5-star written review for Amanda's podcast as well as this podcast, that way it'll help the algorithm populate us out there so that you can find Amanda's episode will be found easier, and would appreciate that. So thanks for your time for being here, and have a fantastic day. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate your time so much. And God bless you. Take care.